Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism and narcissistic relationships. We're going to talk a little bit about radical acceptance today and do a little interesting twist on it. So let's take that on. We're going to apply a concept you might not consider to be part of radical acceptance, but I'm going to make that argument today that's really going to help us understand why it's so difficult. Because radical acceptance is actually a simple concept in some ways. This isn't going to change, so make your decisions on that basis. Narcissism is a stable personality style. Folks who are narcissistic often don't have self-reflective capacity. They don't have self-awareness. They do not feel motivated to change. They will not change enough for the changes to be sufficient to undo the harms in the history of this relationship, or to be sustained in a manner that will create a deep, collaborative, healthy, loving relationship. But radical acceptance also takes in some other territory, including that this doesn't stop hurting even though you've radically accepted. It's not as though you radically accept and then the narcissistic relationship no longer bothers you. You grieve if you don't completely leave the relationship, then their cruel words and actions will continue to hurt you. And the cruel words are very unlikely to stop. But radical acceptance is not a magic pill or a panacea. By radically accepting, you're not going to magically heal. Healing's an active process. Radical acceptance, though, is essential. It's almost, I would say, required for healing, but in and of itself is not going to heal you. Most people, frankly, after they radically accept, will say this feels like the opposite of healing. They feel like they're experiencing significant grief and a recognition that the hope that you had, that you'd carried for years, maybe a lifetime, that someday maybe this is going to get better, someday they'll be accountable, someday they'll see how they hurt me, someday there'll be closure, someday they'll get it right. The recognition that none of that stuff that you were holding on to is coming can result in substantial grief. A way to think about this and where this video idea came from, it can come from the annals of sort of high altitude climbing, which is this idea of acclimatization. You can't just start climbing at sea level and shoot up a mountain. First of all, it'll probably take too long, but for most people, they would get sick. Even when a person starts from around 8,000 feet and popping up to 20,000 feet or higher, it doesn't work. Climbers about to do big climbs, especially those who live generally at sea level, have to acclimatize. And they do that often by camping at high altitude for a while, like let's say at 18,000 feet for a few weeks, to get their bodies adjusted so they can manage not only the exertion of the climb ahead, but more than anything, the effect it'll have on their body. It's not foolproof. More than a few people acclimatize and follow the rules and still develop altitude sickness, which is no joke. It can even be fatal. The reason for this is I'm actually a climbing geek from way back. I'm fascinated by it. I read everything I can about climbing. I mean, these days I can barely get up the stairs. I can't learn enough about it. It's not like I was ever some great climber, not at all. I think it's because I'm a Capricorn and the little goat in me cares about climbing. But that's where this sort of, I think about this a lot. But this concept of acclimatization has a lot of relevance to understanding radical acceptance as part of your healing. Once you radically accept, it's not as simple as, got it, they aren't going to change. All right, yep, got it. I'm going to have to do some workarounds and go no contact. And yay, guess what? I'm not even going to be affected by them anymore because I've radically accepted. No. You actually have to acclimatize to the new conditions, as it were. Spend some time proverbially camping at this altitude, preparing for the exertion and the rigors and the adjustments that are needed for the healing process ahead. When people who live at sea level first get to altitude, they get winded. People in perfectly good shape at altitude may find that just running a short distance or hiking a little takes it out of them. And they may feel fatigued or have headaches and generally feel awful. It's the same with radical acceptance. When people, for example, first really learn how rigid and how unyielding narcissistic patterns are, and recognize that very low probability that the relationship or the person is going to change, there may be some moments of denial, excuses, the idea of maybe I'll be the exception, they're going through a hard time, they had a tough childhood. But as it sets in, the person is living in a new reality, the radical acceptance reality, sort of life at a higher altitude. But you have to live there for a while to adjust. You have to experience the exhaustion of that so-called thinner air. You may find that things that once felt simple, like getting together with a good friend who, you love very much and their marriage is good and they have a happy home life, or seeing a friend who comes from a happy family and spends fun-filled holidays with them, or chatting with someone who has a job where they're valued and appreciated, or even just someone who has people in their lives who are supportive. Those experiences may feel overwhelming, exhausting, demoralizing. In other words, you might feel psychologically winded, where you once were able to have these visits and conversations because you hadn't yet accepted the painful reality of your situation. Now, once you radically accept yours, those kinds of situations can feel really difficult. Things that almost felt easy once may feel more difficult and painful once radical acceptance sets in. So that's the process of acclimatizing. Now, people who are climbing and acclimatizing might take short little workout hikes at the new altitude. Nothing fancy, just enough to get accustomed, their body to get used to it, but nothing like they were able to do at a lower altitude, and nothing like what they will be doing when they actually do their big climb. It's only going to get thinner as they climb higher. In radical acceptance, acclimatization would mean that you initially take life slower. Some of you may keep to yourselves more. You may rest a little more. You may go to therapy. You figure out what this new reality means. You settle into it. You acclimatize. As you become more acclimatized, and it's a hell of a lot easier to acclimatize to altitude, I think, than it is to acclimatize to radical acceptance, then you will adjust to the new environment. Your acclimatization may be happening in a circumstance in which you still have contact with the narcissistic person. So as you settle into radical acceptance, you may find yourself doing better with realistic expectations. You don't engage as much. You don't get into circular arguments. You slowly find workarounds. It's not always easy. You may still find yourself very strong. And every so often, a little bit of hope will sneak in. But as you acclimatize to the idea of radical acceptance, basically as you accept the radical acceptance, the grief never really goes away. I think that's an unrealistic bar. And the wounds are there, and they slowly kind of heal over as wounds do. But you might find that you slowly adjust. You will find that you'll slowly adjust to a new normal, one where you aren't engaging, where you don't take the bait. And most of all, and this is really important, where you are not surprised when they do something deeply unkind, that lacks empathy, that is deeply entitled or self-unaware. And as the acclimatization gets more and more complete, and you find that your body is adjusting, you can start breathing a little bit more normally in the thinner air. As you adjust to the acceptance of this, you will find that you open up to the other steps of healing. Things like building up other relationships where people see you that are validating and help you feel strong and safe, creating safe spaces in your life where you can actually express yourself openly and freely without fear of shame or reprisal, where you start to trust your insights, intuition, perceptions, experiences, memory, ability, and reality. And even when those things are questioned, and if the gaslighters and narcissistic folks are still around in some capacity in your life, those things will be questioned, that now you're able to hold your own and push back and say, I think we're having different experiences. This is how I do it, instead of, I'm sorry, I must have remembered that incorrectly. Radical acceptance is essential, but painful. For a climber, acclimatization is time-consuming, but essential. If you don't want to get sick or worse on a high-altitude climb, you have to adjust to your body has to adjust, your soul has to adjust to the new way the world will be once you radically accept. Your schemas, expectations, your hopes, and your narratives all get dismantled to be replaced with more realistic ones. And that process of breaking down the old and building up the new takes time. Maybe you could hold that as almost a visual for yourself if you are in the early phases of healing and you have just started in with radical acceptance. That almost this vision of, okay, this radical acceptance is beginning, that I'm camping on some sort of glacial moraine. Well, glacial moraines aren't that attractive. So maybe you could make your acclimatization spot mentally prettier, like a beautiful meadow. But it's an in-between space. You're not fully into a new future where you really are vigorously moving forward and healing. But it's also no longer the unseeing prison of the narcissistic relationship. It's not the world where you still believe the future faking or gaslighting. It's that in-between space where you slowly learn to breathe differently, let it come over you, adjust to the different air, take it slow, and get your strength. And then you can set out for the proverbial summit. It's really important you don't try to rush your healing. I mean, it's like trying to will a full moon into existence on the night of the first quarter moon. I mean, it's coming, it's just not coming tonight. Radical acceptance takes a second to take, basically, and for you to acclimatize to the new conditions and climate. And once you do, you will realize you will not only be able to hack the climb, hack the healing, but that you'll be stronger in all areas of your life. But you gotta create that early experience of acclimatizing, that sort of radical acceptance, acclimatization sanctuary for yourself. Have the grief, feel it out, let it out, and be patient with yourself. You will ruminate and euphoric recall and ick list it all out and feel sad and depleted. That's kind of like that altitude sickness. And slowly but surely, you won't. And it's important that you do enjoy the view from the top, because you will get there. And I just, again, when I thought about this video, I was very struck by it because, again, there was a time never was a fancy pants climber, but there were 2 times I actually flew to high places. And I remember one of them, both of these cities, one of them they're both altitude around 12,000. One of the cases, as soon as the plane landed, I think it was Cusco in Peru. And we landed and people got up, to get their bags out of the bins. One guy stood up and he passed right out, stood up, fainted, when he was a tall guy. And I was like, ooh, this altitude is no joke. And the other time I had the opportunity to be in Lhasa in Tibet. And at the time, I happened to be in good shape. I'm not anymore, but I was then really good shape. And I was visiting a site, and there were many, many stairs. And I would be like 5 steps winded. I get these terrible headaches, and I really had to slow down. And one mountain I was hiking, and I live pretty close to sea level, and that mountain the top was probably close to 11,000 feet. And I got very sick at 9,000. So the acclimatization is real. And it really made me reflect on how you got to take a second and you got to adjust to this new space. So I think that's a really interesting way to think about radical acceptance. And this and all kinds of healing, again, I'm always going to plug my new book because those pre-sales matter so much. And so check it out, because it's a manual on healing. It's a manual on being kind to yourself as you go through the process. It's not you. Please, the link is right there. Give it a look. If it works for you, check it out, and thanks again.